Welcome back to our channel. Hope you all are fine and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin with another day of aviation miracle. It was an ordinary afternoon over the Arabian skies when Flight 204, an Airbus A330 carrying 271 passengers, left Dubai for Istanbul. The air was calm, the weather clear, and the crew prepared for what was supposed to be another routine flight. But high above the shimmering blue of the Persian Gulf, destiny had already written a different script. The man in command, Captain Armin Qureshi, had been flying for more than 15 years, known among his peers for an almost unnerving composure. Armin was the kind of pilot who never raised his voice, no matter how rough the turbulence. Behind that quiet demeanor was a man who believed in one thing, that every life on board was his responsibility until the wheels touched the ground again. For the first 2 hours, everything went perfectly. Passengers chatted, children laughed, and the soft hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the cabin. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, serving tea and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, at 38,000 feet, something changed. A strange vibration rippled through the aircraft, small at first, barely noticeable. Within seconds, the left engine's temperature readings spiked abnormally. What began as a minor indicator soon turned into a crisis that would test the limits of human endurance and courage. From the left wing, a sudden flash of orange erupted, followed by a loud metallic bang. Flames burst from the engine, visible even through the cabin windows. The peaceful hum of the flight turned into chaos. Passengers gasped, the cabin crew froze for a split second, and warning alarms filled the cockpit. Flight 204 was now in crisis. Within minutes, thick smoke trailed behind the aircraft as it soared thousands of feet above the sea. The left engine, responsible for half the plane's thrust, had caught fire, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Despite the chaos, Captain Armin remained calm. He reduced power, stabilized the controls, and began emergency procedures. His years of training had prepared him for moments like this, but no simulator could replicate the weight of knowing that 270 souls were depending entirely on his next decision. Inside the cabin, panic began to spread. The lights flickered and the smell of burning fuel filled the air. Passengers held hands, prayed, and whispered final goodbyes. A mother covered her child's face with her scarf to shield him from the smoke. Others stared silently out the windows, watching the left engine burn like a star against the blue horizon. The aircraft started to lose altitude. The fire warning refused to stop, and systems across the left wing began failing one by one. Communication channels crackled, and the nearest airport was hundreds of kilometers away. But even in that moment, Captain Armin's composure never faltered. Every action he took was deliberate, measured, and precise. The crew followed his example, calm, steady, focused. In an atmosphere filled with fear, his silence became the strongest reassurance anyone could offer. As the plane descended through thin layers of smoke and turbulence, the passengers could feel the sharp turns and sudden drops. Many thought it was the end. Yet inside the cockpit, a quiet determination guided every move. The fire suppression systems were deployed, checklists executed, and altitude managed with mathematical precision. For 15 long minutes, the aircraft flew with one engine disabled and the other struggling to maintain lift. Airspeed dropped dangerously low, and the plane began to roll slightly toward the damaged side. From the outside, it looked like a wounded bird trying to stay in the sky. Ground control began to clear the airspace for an emergency landing, but the nearest safe runway was still too far. The flight crew faced an impossible choice: to descend rapidly and risk losing control, or to hold altitude and hope the flames could be contained long enough to reach land. Every second became a calculation of life and death. Through it all, there was one thing that never changed: the calm inside the cockpit. While systems failed and alarms screamed, the captain's steady actions turned chaos into order. He didn't let fear dictate his judgment. Instead, he relied on instinct, training, and a promise he had made long ago, that he would never give up on a flight until every life was safe. The passengers couldn't see his face, but they could feel the steadiness in every move of the aircraft. When the plane stopped shaking for a moment, it was enough for them to believe they might still make it. By the time the fire began to spread beyond the engine housing, Flight 204 had already lost significant altitude. The smoke was visible to radar tracking stations across the region. Emergency teams on the ground prepared for the worst. Yet somehow, despite everything, the plane remained airborne. It was no longer a normal flight. It was survival at 30,000 feet. The left wing had sustained damage. Hydraulic pressure was dropping, and one side of the aircraft was dangerously unstable. But the pilot refused to surrender to panic. In that sky filled with fire and fear, his calm became the only barrier between life and death. And as the aircraft crossed into the boundaries of Qatar's airspace, hope flickered once more. A new runway appeared on the radar, still distant, but reachable if they could hold altitude a little longer. It was the beginning of a long battle between man, machine, and fate. What happened next would test every limit of human courage. Because within the next 10 minutes, the situation was about to get worse. The Airbus A330 struggled against the sky. Flames from the left engine licked the metal wing as smoke streamed into the cockpit, curling like dark tendrils around the instruments. Captain Arman Qureshi's calm remained the sole anchor in a sea of chaos. The aircraft shuddered violently with each gust of wind, and every alert in the cockpit screamed a warning of imminent disaster. Systems that pilots relied upon were failing one by one. Hydraulic pressure, once steady, fluctuated wildly. Fuel levels dropped unevenly, and electrical circuits sparked intermittently. The once smooth hum of the engines had become an erratic roar, a reminder that survival now depended solely on human skill and composure. High above the Arabian deserts and the Persian Gulf, passengers felt the full weight of gravity's pull. The plane's nose pitched slightly downward. Seats tilted. Luggage shifted. Oxygen masks hung in the aisle, swaying with each vibration. Fear had taken physical form, eyes wide, hands clasped, knees trembling. The world outside had become a storm of fire. Clouds and lightning, while inside, it was a storm of disbelief and prayer. The left wing, damaged and aflame, created asymmetric drag. The aircraft tended to roll toward the failing side with every attempt to climb or adjust pitch. This imbalance was subtle but deadly. Calculations had to be precise, every small correction critical. The slightest error could tip the plane into an uncontrollable spiral. Captain Arman's hands gripped the yoke firmly. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and precise. The autopilot had long since disengaged, and even the backup systems were unreliable. There was no margin for error. He managed the throttle of the right engine, maintaining the delicate balance needed to stabilize the plane. It was a dance of mathematics, instinct, and courage. Smoke began to filter into the cockpit, stinging the eyes and filling the air with acrid heat. Despite this, the pilot continued monitoring instruments and compensating for weight shifts. He adjusted the flaps incrementally to slow descent, carefully managing the glide. Outside, the left engine continued to burn, flames reflecting in the captain's visor like molten danger. Meanwhile, the cabin's tension had reached a crescendo. Passengers leaned forward instinctively, some gripping their armrests as if holding on to life itself. Children cried silently into blankets. Elders closed their eyes in prayer. Flight attendants moved quickly, issuing masks and guiding passengers, their faces taut with concentration and fear. Yet even in that chaos, a semblance of order remained, an invisible thread woven by the captain's calm and the crew's composure. The aircraft had lost thousands of feet of altitude in mere minutes. Instruments that tracked speed, elevation, and engine thrust blinked erratically. Emergency lights flickered in the cabin as the plane's systems faltered. Outside, storm clouds roiled violently, lightning illuminating the burning left engine and the trembling wing. Crucial decision had to be made. The nearest runway was still miles away. Yet the aircraft could no longer maintain controlled altitude indefinitely. Any miscalculation and the glide path would become fatal. Captain Arman adjusted the trim, compensating for the wing's uneven lift. Each input on the yoke required a combination of physics, experience, and instinct, a knowledge forged over thousands of flight hours. At 30,000 feet, the plane began to descend more rapidly. The horizon tilted unnaturally. The gulf below reflected the orange fire from the left engine like a molten mirror. Passengers' faces, when glimpsed through the aisle, displayed a raw spectrum of human emotion: terror, disbelief, hope, and helplessness. Some whispered prayers. Others silently recorded moments on their phones, as if preserving the memory of survival or farewell. The left wing continued to burn, metal glowing with heat. Smoke bellowed from vents and the acrid smell began to permeate the cabin. Even with these hazards, the aircraft maintained a fragile balance. It was not stable. It was a miracle in motion, controlled by nothing but human resolve. Captain Armin initiated a slow banking turn to align the plane with a distant stretch of runway. His eyes scanned the instruments, recalculating every parameter constantly. The plane pitched slightly, compensating for the asymmetric drag, and glided with extraordinary delicacy. Lightning forked dangerously close, illuminating the flaming engine and casting shadows in the cockpit. Passengers began to sense the rhythm of survival. The initial hysteria gradually gave way to tense awareness. They felt the precision in the subtle corrections, the tiny adjustments that prevented disaster. Though they could not see the calculations or know the exact nature of the danger, instinct told them they were in capable hands. As the aircraft approached lower altitudes, the situation grew more precarious. Turbulence increased, and the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the fuselage, the engines roared, and the wing's structural integrity was compromised. Captain Armin guided the plane like a sculptor, shaping fragile clay slow, deliberate and unwavering. Minutes stretched like hours as the glide continued. The runway, still distant, remained the sole point of hope. Outside, clouds clashed violently. Wind threatened to overturn the plane, and the left engine continued to blaze with relentless intensity. Yet inside the cockpit, calm prevailed. Every decision was measured, every adjustment intentional. The aircraft descended below 15,000 feet. The left wing, now visibly weakened, required even more precise control. Passengers felt the vibrations intensify, some gripping their seats as though their strength could hold the plane together. Every second counted, every action had consequence. Despite the overwhelming chaos, the miracle persisted. The plane, damaged and aflame, remained in controlled flight. Survival hinged entirely on human skill, judgment, and composure. Captain Armin's calm had become the single force preventing catastrophe. As the plane drew closer to the coast, hope glimmered faintly on the horizon. The runway, a distant line of light, promised salvation. Yet the challenge remained monumental. Landing a severely damaged, single-engine burning aircraft in a storm would require perfect timing, nerves of steel, and flawless execution. It was in this delicate balance, between destruction and hope, that the human element shone brightest. The captain's focus and precision were the only barriers keeping disaster at bay. Every second, every adjustment, every calm breath was a measure of courage in the face of near-impossible odds. This was no longer a flight. It was survival, orchestrated by one man's refusal to yield to fear. And as the coastline came into clearer view, the next chapter of this story would demand the impossible, a landing that no simulator, no training, and no ordinary pilot could accomplish. The Airbus A330 descended steadily, though it was far from stable. Flames still licked the left engine, smoke trailing across the fuselage, painting the sky with streaks of orange and black. The storm had intensified, rain slashing diagonally across the cockpit windows, lightning illuminating the burning wing in sharp, fleeting flashes. Captain Armin Qureshi's face remained composed. Though the situation had reached critical, the aircraft had lost altitude faster than expected, and the right engine, carrying the full burden of flight, was straining under immense pressure. Every system warning was active hydraulic fluctuations, low fuel pressure, and structural integrity alerts, yet somehow the plane remained in controlled flight. The runway appeared in the distance, its lights barely visible through the storm. It represented the only hope for survival. But the challenge was unprecedented. Landing a heavily damaged, single-engine plane in a torrential downpour, with a flaming wing and limited control, was considered impossible. Yet the aircraft approached with precision, guided only by Captain Armin's skill and determination. Inside the cabin, passengers sensed the critical nature of the moment. The initial panic had settled into tense anticipation. Eyes were glued to the windows, some gripping armrests, others silently praying. Flight attendants moved methodically through the aisles, maintaining calm while bracing themselves for the imminent impact. Every person aboard was acutely aware of the razor-thin margin between survival and disaster. The storm buffeted the aircraft. Wind gusts pushed against the fuselage, creating violent rolls and sudden dips. Rain obscured visibility, making the approach more treacherous. The left wing, already weakened by fire, threatened to fail at any moment. Despite all this, Captain Armin kept the plane aligned with the runway. Every movement of the yoke was calculated to compensate for asymmetrical drag. Every throttle adjustment measured to maintain lift without overstressing the right engine. Seconds felt like minutes as the plane drew closer. The runway lights grew clearer, reflecting off puddles on the wet tarmac. Smoke from the left engine trailed behind, and sparks from damaged components lit the night sky like fleeting fireworks. The plane shuddered with each turbulence, yet it inched steadily forward. As the aircraft descended below 5,000 feet, the fire began to flare unpredictably, sending tongues of orange along the wing. The hydraulic warnings intensified, threatening control surfaces critical for landing. Yet the captain's focus never wavered. He visualized the runway, calculated angles, adjusted pitch and bank with micro-precision. It was a ballet of physics, experience, and instinct against impossible odds. The final approach began. The plane was now only a few hundred feet above the runway, rain pelting the fuselage and the wind threatening to push it off course. Smoke from the left engine blew across the windows, making visibility nearly zero. Any pilot under normal conditions would have aborted the landing, but there was no alternative. Only the runway could save the lives on. Board Captain Armin executed a flawless flare, lifting the nose just enough to soften the impact. The right landing gear made contact first, skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. Sparks flew from the damaged left engine as the plane began its final roll. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, lights flashing in response to the imminent arrival. The plane shuddered violently as it decelerated, the damaged wing dragging slightly against friction and water. But gradually it came to a complete stop, upright and intact against all expectations. In the cabin, passengers erupted in silent relief. Tears streaked down faces, hands clasped in gratitude. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, assisting and checking for injuries. But miraculously, all 271 souls were safe. No life had been lost. Outside, the storm began to clear, leaving only the reflection of runway lights on wet asphalt and the lingering smoke from the left engine. Emergency crews approached cautiously, prepared for catastrophe, but instead were met with a scene of improbable survival. For Captain Armin, the ordeal was not over. He remained at the controls until the plane came to a complete stop and engines were shut down. Only then did he allow himself a brief moment of relief. He had performed the impossible, a landing that would be studied by pilots and aviation experts for years to come. The world would soon learn of this miracle. News of Flight 204's survival spread rapidly, capturing the attention of media and aviation authorities alike. Every news outlet highlighted the calm, precise, and heroic actions of Captain Armin Qureshi, whose composure under unimaginable pressure had saved 271 lives. Investigations later confirmed the aircraft's systems had been on the brink of complete failure. The left engine fire, combined with hydraulic loss and structural strain, would have been fatal for most pilots. The data recorded in the black box revealed a sequence of extraordinary maneuvers, precise adjustments, and split-second decisions that left aviation experts in awe. The passengers, many of whom had been convinced they would not survive, later recounted the heroism and composure of the captain and crew. Every gesture, every movement, every adjustment had been a lifeline, invisible yet essential, guiding them to safety. In the weeks that followed, aviation boards reviewed the flight in detail. Training manuals were updated with scenarios derived from Flight 204. Captain Armin became a symbol of hope and courage in the skies, proof that even in the face of overwhelming disaster, human skill and composure could triumph over fear and chaos. For those on board, the memory of the storm, the flames, and the impossible landing would remain forever etched in their minds. But above all, the story would always be remembered as one of hope, a demonstration that calm, courage, and expertise can prevail even when the world seems determined to end. Flight 204 had been more than a journey. It had been a testament to human resilience. The impossible had been achieved. Lives had been saved. Hope had survived. The rain had finally stopped. Smoke still lingered near the edges of the runway as the last fire truck circled the motionless Airbus A330, its left engine reduced to twisted metal, blackened and still steaming. The once terrifying roar of the storm had quieted into a ghostly silence. Only the rhythmic wails of distant sirens and the hiss of water jets broke the stillness. Inside the cabin, passengers sat frozen, their minds still trapped in the chaos of the past hour. Some cried softly. Others clasped hands, whispering silent prayers of gratitude. The oxygen masks hung like fading memories, swinging gently as the emergency lights flickered above. At the cockpit door, the young captain finally exhaled a deep, shaking breath. His hands, still trembling, rested on the throttles that had refused to obey for so long. He stared out the window. The rain streaks had stopped, replaced by faint golden rays breaking through retreating clouds. It was over. Against all odds, he had done it. The crew stepped out first, guiding the shaken passengers toward the emergency slides. Each step on the wet tarmac was like stepping into a second life. Reporters, rescue teams, and airport officials rushed forward, their voices blending into the echo of disbelief. Cameras clicked, radios buzzed. No one could quite understand how the plane had managed to land at all. The investigation begins. Within hours, the burnt remains of the left engine were sealed off. Aviation experts swarmed the site. Black boxes were recovered. Every sensor log, every switch, every sound recording was analyzed. The world's media called it the miracle at 35,000 feet. But behind the technical questions was something far more human. How a young pilot, barely 29, managed to stay calm when even veteran captains might have frozen. In the following days, investigators pieced together the impossible timeline. The first explosion had ripped through the engine mid-air, severing power and damaging key flight controls. The cockpit alarms had screamed, warning of hydraulic failure and fire spread. Yet somehow the captain and his co-pilot manually rerouted controls, switching to backup electrical systems that weren't meant to last more than minutes. When the aircraft lost altitude, the pilot had chosen not to eject excess fuel, a decision that went against standard emergency protocol, but it was that one act that gave the aircraft enough weight stability to glide evenly through the turbulence. His intuition, not the checklist, saved hundreds, a hero revealed. 3 days later, the captain stood before a sea of microphones at the National Aviation Headquarters. His uniform was clean now, but his eyes still carried the exhaustion of that night. The air was filled with applause as reporters shouted his name, calling him the calmest man in the sky. But when he finally spoke, he didn't talk about courage, and he spoke about hope. He said that the passengers' faces, the tears, the prayers had given him strength. That leadership wasn't about skill alone. It was about staying calm so others could believe they might live. His words went viral. Around the world, headlines told of his miracle landing, from Tokyo to Toronto, from Dubai to Delhi. Aviation. Schools began teaching the incident as the calm command, the hidden hero. Weeks later, during a deeper investigation, another truth quietly surfaced, one that made the story even more remarkable. It turned out that one of the flight's onboard software engineers, a 25-year-old woman traveling as a passenger, had helped restore part of the communication link between the aircraft's navigation and engine control unit. During the descent, she had volunteered to assist, advising the pilots through the intercom about the electrical bypass method. She'd studied in the same aircraft model. Her calm input had given the pilots an extra 2 minutes of system life, just enough to guide the aircraft through final alignment with the runway. When this revelation came to light, she too was honored publicly. Standing beside the captain, she shyly avoided cameras, her hands folded as officials praised her quick thinking. The two were later awarded the Aviation Medal of Valor, the highest civilian recognition for saving lives in flight, a story that gave hope. Months passed, but people still spoke about that flight. Documentaries called it the night Hope landed. Airlines across the world adopted new emergency communication protocols, inspired by the teamwork between a pilot and a civilian passenger. At the end of every broadcast, they played a short clip, the captain standing under soft rain at the edge of the runway that night, staring up at the sky. His voice, steady but full of emotion, saying that the storm wasn't the enemy, fear was. And when asked what he had learned from that night, he smiled faintly and said, "Even when everything burns, hope still flies."